This is the Connor Chepnick podcast, episode number 5. Lucky enough to be joined by Macrojack at Macrojack21. Jackson, I appreciate you taking some time to come on the Connor Chepnick podcast today and speak to me about Bitcoin.
Yeah, thanks, Connor, for reaching out. I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. So to get it started, I'd love to know kind of what made you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. You got some of the best Twitter threads I've seen out there. So I'd love to kind of learn a little bit more about what made you go down that and want to start, spreading the good word of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I first really heard about Bitcoin in 2017, which I think is a popular year for people to hear about Bitcoin because of the price action. So at the time, I was a senior in college. So it was my fall semester in August. So we just got back to school. I think I was like studying for an exam or something, or I was doing something in the business building of my college. And I was with a friend of mine, and he was really big into, I mean, I studied finance, but he was very much into following stocks, and he got into cryptos and way before I did. And he was the one who kind of introduced Bitcoin to me, and he was like, hey, like, you should buy a little bit of this. This is like in August of 2017. I think the price at the time was like 4,000 or so. So I bought I got a Coinbase account, and I bought, I think, $200 of Bitcoin, and I didn't even know what I was owning. And then, the following months, the price continued to climb up to a peak of 19,000 something. So my $200 went to like, I don't know, $900 or so. And I still didn't know what I was owning at the time. So then I watched it go all the way back down into the bear market, back down to like 3K in 2018. And I moved up to New York after graduating. And so I graduated from college in May 2018, moved up to New York in August. So I was working full time, first job out of school, and I still owned a little bit of Bitcoin, but I was just like, I guess, so apathetic to it. And I didn't really commit any time to learning about it. So I just had a very minimal amount. And then I don't know how it crossed my feed or my desk, but the first thing I really read that created some conviction for me in Bitcoin was VJ Boyapati's article at the time, Bullish Case for Bitcoin. So I think that was in fall of 2018. That was the first thing I read. And things started to click there for me. And I would say over that time in 2019, 2020, I continued to read other Bitcoin books and articles, and things started to make a lot of sense. But I was still kind of at the time I was working in like traditional finance. And I was still kind of in that mindset of Bitcoin is just like maybe a part of my portfolio, my investment portfolio. Right. So it wasn't until 2020 where everything just seemed so broken to me. And that's when I mean, as you did, and most people did, I didn't really I found myself with not much time, or a lot of time, but not many things to do, right? Like after the lockdown started. So I had a lot of time to kind of start reading and thinking through things more, and getting away from like the typical BS of like going out every weekend and just like being in that cycle. So I had more time to be productive, and things started to click for me. I was like, the system doesn't really work for people my age, or really anyone besides like a very small group. I would say like the 1% plus some it works well for. And it was just frustrating to see like small businesses get crushed in 2020, and Wall Street having like, record years on trading revenues, and that whole situation just didn't sit right with me. So now I'm still in it for the gains a little bit, but I'm also like this, the Bitcoin system is a system that I have conviction in, and I think would create a better future. Which, being 26 years old, I have a lot of future ahead of me. So I want a system that works for myself and my peers.
Yeah, and it's so funny to hear my story so similar. It was 2017 when I first got involved, and I remember my buddy showed me a documentary called Banking on Bitcoin, which I think is on YouTube for free. It's a great documentary. And then it talks about, it's a decentralized ledger, and you don't have to rely on a third party. And I did the exact same thing. I got a Coinbase account and bought a little, not knowing what I was buying, thought it was some investment. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is cool. Like, I got a little, and then obviously it appreciated, and I was all excited. But I was like, isn't like the whole point of this thing? I don't have to rely on a third party. So like, why do I need Coinbase to buy this thing? Like, I didn't even realize what an exchange was per se. Why I needed something like that, and then kind of this, I brushed it off. It's like whatever. It crashed. I'm just gonna kind of keep it, not really think much about it. Like you said, the more you go down the rabbit hole, I don't think there's anything wrong being in it for the number go up technology. The more you learn, the more you realize like your purchasing power will appreciate greatly in Bitcoin, but also the fact like this can bring so much peace and prosperity and abundance to the world and stop, like you were saying, that system where the cantillionaire effect, where the people close to the money printer benefit and everyone else suffers. It's like what did Andrew Jackson say? He's like, you bankers essentially stuff your pockets with the breadcrumbs in the economy, and when you win, you guys take all the profit, and when you lose, you socialize your losses amongst everyone else. And it's so hard to, once you actually do take the time to put in that proof of work and go down the rabbit hole, it's so hard to unsee the ways that Bitcoin can make the world a better place.
Yeah, I mean, we were both too young, but I mean, it was born out of like the 2008 financial crisis. So it is a solution. I agree with you. Like, it's not a bad thing to be in it for the number go up, or to think of it as like a part of your portfolio allocation. That might make sense for some people. Um, but it wasn't created for that purpose. It's not supposed to be like another Wall Street investment product. It is a new like monetary system.
Yeah, one thing I'd love to get your thought on today is because we saw CPI was higher than expectations, and of course Bitcoin dropped like right under 10% in USD terms, and it almost seems like some of these big institutions are looking at Bitcoin the same way we looked at it when we got it in 2017. Like, it's this massive risk-on asset, and the more you learn about it, the more you, at least from my experience, it's become so apparently clear this is like the ultimate risk-off asset. Fiat currency hyperinflates, this is what you're going to want to be holding. But from someone who worked on in traditional finance, do you think that is kind of the perspective of most of these big, hedge funds and banks?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. There's this guy, I think Tim Peterson, which I posted a thread the other day, or a tweet, and he sent me like one of his research that I have yet to read. It was just a couple days ago, but I think it's research about Bitcoin price manipulation by whales. So I think that does play a factor, but specifically to your question, how Wall Street views Bitcoin, I mean, it is certainly frustrating because, like you said, right now everything kind of trades on, I would say, on Fed balance sheet and monetary policy. So in my mind, like any investment right now is a one-way trade. Are they printing more money, or are they not printing more money?
Yeah.
That's all. Like, I mean, that's all that matters for stocks or for real estate or for Bitcoin. It shouldn't be that way, especially for Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it's proof of work to actually understand what Bitcoin is, and I think, well, there's not really an incentive to understand it if you're making a lot of money from the financial system as it exists today. And then the other thing is just like, they can make money off of Bitcoin as a product as well, right? So
Mm,
there's an incentive for Wall Street to just kind of like financialize Bitcoin, the asset, so they can sell products on top, kind of like that are correlated to Bitcoin, or like some sort of like hedge product, stuff like that. I think we will get to a point where, if you follow any of like the big macro analysts in the space, like I would generally agree with them that we'll get to a point where things are just getting so ugly in the economy and the financial markets, and it's tough for me to say when that would be. But I would say within the next 12 months. I feel comfortable saying that within the next 12 months, like, things will probably get pretty ugly if the Federal Reserve continues to drain liquidity from the system and hike interest rates. But then I think it's just like, there will come a point where they will just have to print more money, because there's no political will for like austerity or a depression. There's a lot more political will for inflation, and if people can't like it'll just be so messy. I can't even like speculate on what that looks like, but they're going to be forced to print more money, and I think Bitcoin and all other what we would consider risk on assets will go up at that point. And then I don't know when this will happen, but I think more people will come to the conclusion that like, you know, inflation is still high measured by CPI, which is like a fake metric. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so like inflation will still be high measured by CPI, but then the Fed is going to be printing more money, and I think that's really like the big. We'll see, but I think that would make a lot of people question the Federal Reserve and central bank credibility more broadly.
Yeah, it's so funny. My stepdad recently came and visited me up here in Boston, and brilliant dude. And he was just talking to me at the end of the day. What matters is real goods in the economy, and you know, he's such a brilliant guy, and he's starting to get into Bitcoin, but he still has a lot of proof of work to do. And just listening to him talk about that and how it's like the price of oil might fluctuate in dollar terms, but a barrel of oil is a barrel of oil. Someone's 1 hour of service is 1 hour of service, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. And so many of the problems with today is the fact, like you're saying, we have 12 individuals who centrally plan things and act like, at least according to Keynesian economists, they're these like omnipotent beings that can figure out how to plan something as complex as a nation state's economy, and it's just wreaking havoc. And I saw on your Twitter you got involved with the beef initiative, and I'm actually recording this podcast on top of my freezer filled with KNC cattle because I hope that I don't want to see things get so messy, but it seems like we're kind of in the late stages of an empire, and I'd love to learn how you got involved with that, and kind of ways you've been, if you will, decentralizing your life to not be so reliant on our current system that is clearly struggling.
Yeah, no, it's KNC. That's a good person to be getting your beef from.
I gotta say, man, it is some of the best beef I have ever had. It's been one of the best purchases I've made. Getting some grass-fed beef, highly recommend.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think anyone who's followed me has seen I've been tweeting a lot about that. But yeah, so I mean, how did I get involved? So thinking about a year ago, I'm a big fan of Marty Bent, and Marty had Texas Slim on his podcast probably in like October, November of last year, so about a year ago. And I heard Slim on the podcast, and I was just like, yeah, this guy is making a lot of sense. His message resonated with me. He's a cool, like, I forget, like 6th or 7th generation Texan. Really nice guy, and he has a great message that resonated with me. And so I heard this is back in the fall, and then I ended up going on a kind of like a cross country road trip, I guess, while I was working remotely with my girlfriend at the time, my fiance now. But we
Nice.
so like,
Congrats.
thanks, dude. But we so we were in Colorado, Arizona, California, and Texas for about 5 months. And so when I was spending time in Austin, we were in Austin for like 6 weeks or so. And I would go to like the Bitcoin Commons here and there, like do some work. And like they have the monthly Austin Bitcoin Club meetups, which are really cool. I mean, the ethos or just like the community of Bitcoiners down there in Austin is pretty unbelievable, honestly. But then, yeah, so let me think. I ordered a beef box when I was down in Austin. So I was stocked up for my stay in Texas from KNC. And then they were having a freezer sale or something like outside. It was like on one of the ranch roads, some random like Saturday in June. And I just stopped by, and they were just like selling all different types of cuts. So I got some cool ones. I got some Asabuco and like, Pinacha maybe. I forget what some of the other ones were, but I got some cool cuts in there. And I got to meet Cole like very briefly, but really, really nice guy. And then really after the fact, so that was all in June. And then in July, I told you before we were recording, I got laid off from my job. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and I began writing more and publishing on Twitter. And I'm trying to think, like, I think I just reached out to Texas Slim at some point, maybe in July or August, and said like, hey, I've been following your work for a bit. I love your message of shake a rancher's hand, market access, food intelligence, all that stuff, which we can get into. So I messaged him. I was like, hey, would just love to like, I'm back in, I'm in like the Philadelphia area. It's like I'm going back here. Like I'm definitely going to be meeting up with like some farmers and ranchers here. Just would love to get your thoughts on like kind of, how to build those relationships and how to introduce them to Bitcoin without, like essentially how do I understand like the mind of a rancher. So then we ended up having a phone call. One thing led to the next, and I ended up writing a thread kind of with Slim, and then I wrote like a longer form article that was posted on his Substack. And I'm actually driving down to Georgia for the the Food Intelligence Summit in a couple days. So um,
Nice.
yeah, no, I'm excited about that. And I guess to the second part of the question, just like um, what am I doing in my own life to decentralize? And I would say like I don't think some people on Bitcoin Twitter are like very doomer, very bearish.
Yeah.
I think what ultimately is going to happen is like there will be we are in a recession. I mean, I know the definition got changed, but we are in a recession, and
100%.
it'll get uglier. But I know they're going to print more money. They're going to really just like there's like historically speaking, that's really the only choice that they have is to print money, and I think things will get ugly. I don't know, I don't know how bad it'll get, but I think some simple things that I've done and what other people could do is, I think most importantly, even I would say even more important than buying Bitcoin, is securing like local, creating relationships with your local farmers and ranchers. Because I think if COVID has really taught us anything, is that if like shit really hits the fan for some reason, you can't really be reliant on a grocery store to have the things that you need in your home, right?
Mhm.
Like everything is so interconnected now, and it all really takes is like one crisis somewhere to really throw a wrench in the plans of the global supply chain. So like I think it's I really think that everyone should be localizing their food access. Slim calls it market access. Like you should be establishing market access in your area, and it's really not hard. And like from my experience, they're some of the nicest people I've ever met. Like if you go out to a farm, and you genuinely want to get to know these people and you want to support them, buy directly from them, they're very appreciative of that. So I think that's like one of the most important things to do. Secondly, I would say buy Bitcoin. So that it's tough to say. I think they're both very important. But you need food too. You need food more than you need Bitcoin if things get really bad. So, uh,
Completely agree.
and then
It's
what else? Like, it's tough, man. Like I'm kind of in between wanting to. So, like I said, I'm in the Philly area right now, is where I grew up for the most of my life, and I'm kind of in between like wanting to just buy a house here, and start like actually building more of a life, but also my fiance and I both really like Texas, so we've been kind of thinking about going back. Um, but I would say like, I guess I'm saying it but not doing it. Like it's probably smart to live like in one place and kind of like have build a resiliency in your life rather than like maximize resilience over convenience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%, man. I live in
Yeah.
Boston now, and part of me wants to move to New Hampshire so bad because I like the law so much better. I like the live free or die mentality. But at the same time, I love Boston, and it's kind of that push and pull. I know Texas is such a much more free place, if you will, and Philly has its problems, but also there's something, as we've seen with COVID, there's a lot of issues with big cities, but there's also something really special about you know fostering a community and the place you've lived for a long time.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, Boston's a great city. I mean, I've only been up there like maybe 3 or 4 times, but it's a very charming city. Lots of history.
No
I
doubt.
I think there's, maybe this is controversial to say, but I think the people up there are actually very nice, especially being from Philly. I know like we don't like each other that much, but yeah, no, I feel the same way, man. Like all my good friends live in New York still. Like all my good college friends live in New York. Most of my high school friends are in the Philly area still. And yeah, man, it just like as much as it would be fun to move back there, it just like doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I was just out there this past weekend, and it really hasn't changed much. Like people just going out and drinking, and I felt like shit on Monday. Honestly, I felt so behind because I didn't really do anything productive, and like that's okay here and there on the weekends, like let loose and maybe just relax. But getting into that's how it was like when I first graduated from school, and just such an unproductive way to live, and it's living for the weekends. Yeah, don't like that.
No, 100%. It's like it's
Yeah,
high time preference versus low time preference. Like, everyone to some degree, it's fun to go out and party, but then you like wake up the next day and you're like, damn, I wasn't productive. I didn't really accomplish anything. Like, there's always a time and place for it. I agree, but in terms of you don't get that feeling of satisfaction or gratitude or like you did something to help the world. You just wake up, you're like, God, I'm hungover. Like this, this is not in
yeah,
hindsight, this is not the move. One thing you
yeah,
mentioned, about Texas Slim and the food intelligence thing. I think it's very easy to kind of fall into that doom scrolling trap and feel like it's all going to crap. And then I listened to Texas Slim on Pomp's podcast and just him talk about how centralized the production or the producers right for the
yeah,
meat is, and how there's all these regulations, and it's just so wild to think. You did a thread on kind of controlling food and how they killed all those bisons in the 1800s. You also did
yeah,
a thread on the Roman Empire and how it kind of collapsed via taxation. And Safedine talked about that in his book, how they started clipping the gold coins. And it's so eerie to see all those things that happen throughout history where empires are collapsing. But I bring that up because listening to Texas Slim talk about how we are shaking the rancher's hand and we're creating these circular economies, and like you're saying, how grateful these people are to have them buy directly from you, and building those relationships. It's like it's easy to get depressed or upset or pissed off doom scrolling Twitter, but to see people like I think what he's doing is so incredible because it at least from my perspective gives me so much hope to see that it is possible to decentralize the control of food and not allow the global elite to have some two-tier world order where we're eating cricket paste for dinner. And, like you can go and shake your rancher's hand and you know establish these relationships that will be incredibly meaningful, especially if who knows what is in store for the future, but it's looking like it's going to be a turbulent 20s.
yeah. I would say so. I think the market access, like Texas Slim talks about, is really important, and it's really not complicated. Like especially where I live, and it's probably fairly similar to where you are. I mean, you can get like I'm not too far from Philadelphia, but I'm not in the city. But I could drive like probably like an hour in any direction, and there'd be like I don't know, at least 10, 20 farms in each direction that I could give them a call or send them an email, or you could just show up too. Like it depends on the farm or ranch specifically. Like last week, I just came across a goat dairy farm not too far from me, so I just
Thanks.
I got their number. I called and I was like, hey, I wanted to stop by. Like, is there anything I should know? And she just sent me a text message with like all the information that I need to know, and they just have like a self-serve 24-hour like farm store on the property. So I just went over there. But it's really so simple and like um it's low hanging fruit, honestly. Like get your food from people locally, build those relationships. Like it's a much more resilient way to live. And you'll feel good about it too. Like humans are meant to connect with each other, and the grocery store is just all about getting in and out as fast as possible. Like I don't want to talk to anyone. Like I just want to have my list, get everything and leave. And it's completely different if you go to a farm and like you actually get to meet the people, and they're very good people, and they probably they share a lot of the same qualms that Bitcoiners do about just the government and all the bureaucracy and how poorly managed things are. So you probably would get along with them just fine. But yeah, no, I forget where we were going exactly, but yeah, I think
No, but
those are good steps.
yeah, Breedlove always talks about how like an exchange should be a mutually beneficial thing, and
Yeah.
from your experience talking to farmers, that's exactly what it is. And when that exchange gets fucked up, if you will, is when you have a third party cutting in and coercing people and manipulating it. And I got to say, listening to Texas Slim talk about, I knew the FDA had its problems, but like some of the crap they're pulling and manipulating the language. So now I forget food doesn't have to have genetically modified. It can be like something engineered or
Bioengineered.
yeah, like that
Yeah.
is crazy. And I've gone up to New Hampshire a couple of times, and I need to actually go shake a rancher's hand. But just stopping at like little farms, the food I've gotten there has not only been so much cheaper, but it's been such better quality, so much more delicious. It feels good to support like a small business like that. Except when I go to the grocery store, it's not like, it's like yippee, like going to a farm is like, that's a really cool experience, and seeing, the fields, and it's always been a feel good experience. And like you said, when you're in the grocery store, it's like, all right, what's on my list? Check, 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 check. All right, I'm out of
Exactly.
here.
Yeah, and you just hit like another such an important point to highlight is it's not only just about like having access to local food producers. It's also about knowing like what you're eating too. I, first heard this from Slim and about how like the amount like the if you buy like a pack of ground beef at the grocery store, it could be like 20, 40, 50, 60, like whatever, different cows in that pound of ground beef. Like that's disgusting. Like I'll
Yeah.
still eat the ground beef from a grocery store if I have to, if that's my option. But I'd rather go to a property that's down the road and just buy like grass fed, grass finished beef directly from them. You know exactly what you're buying. Same thing with any vegetables. Like if you want to get like some veggies or fruits, like you can go to the property, you can see how they care for the animals and care for the crop, and you can feel good about what you're buying versus the grocery store. It's so ambiguous, and there's a lot of deception, frankly, and like labeling and all of it really, advertising.
Seriously, my grandma sent me an article the other day and was talking about how the Mars company didn't have blue M&Ms because it was an unnatural food color to for people. It's like, would you eat blue spaghetti? No, so that's why we don't have blue M&Ms. And I saw the other day on Twitter, it's like Aunt Jemima did a collab with Captain Crunch, and they had like blue pancake syrup. And it's like how far we've come to like little kids, but like it's funny to a degree, but it's also like little kids are eating you know freaking high fructose corn syrup with blue whatever in it. That's horrible chemical for you. And it's and people don't even realize it's very hopeful to see Texas Slim what he's doing with the beef initiative, because people don't even realize the crap they're putting in their bodies and the havoc that wreaks. And it's so funny that Bitcoin Twitter has this burning hate for seed oils, rightfully so. And it's very encouraging to see. It's like I want to orange pill as many people as possible, but those who just aren't willing to put in the proof of work, it's like those people are going to kill themselves if they don't change something, and they keep eating this crap and these chemicals. And it's unfortunate, but it's also it's back to the low time preference, high time preference thing, and being willing to put in that work to understand.
Yeah, it is a shame. I mean, it's really messed up. Like honestly, um, the deception in the food industry, especially for children.
Yeah.
But I would say for like, adults, I think people are just so apathetic nowadays. Like, yeah, they don't really care what they eat. They don't care what they look like. They don't care about their job, or, they don't care to understand investments really. So I think actually that's the biggest when people talk about mass adoption for Bitcoin, I think apathy is the biggest barrier actually, because I think there's just so many people that kind of go through life like in a very meaningless way, and they don't really care what happens to them. It's a shame. I mean, there's a lot of beauty in life. Of course, there's a lot of struggle as well, but it's part of it. But yeah, man, the people are very apathetic about their health for sure.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the thing. It's like humans always take the path of least resistance. And that's honestly one of the things that has me over a long time horizon so bullish about Bitcoin, because it seems like Bitcoiners are the opposite of apathetic. They're very passionate about how they feel and what they believe in. And, you kind of touched on it when you mentioned It's like, you went out and you feel bad about it. It's like you weren't productive. And of course, there's a time and place for that, but it seems like the deeper you go down the rabbit hole, the more you want to contribute and you want to help people and you want to do good and productive things. And I'd love to hear you touch on kind of what habits you ended up developing the farther down the Bitcoin rabbit hole you went.
Yeah. So talk about apathy. I mean, like in college and even after I graduated from school, like I just was I don't want to speak too badly of myself because I wasn't a bad person, but I think I was just like a typical person who didn't really give much thought to, or I'll say it this way, I wasn't that much of an intentional person. So I kind of like just, did my job, did it well, and then like didn't really pay attention to what I would eat, or I wouldn't make time to work out or exercise. I was very lazy, and then I was like going out every weekend and drinking, and just really felt like shit. Like it was a cycle of, you go out Friday, you go out Saturday, and then like you don't actually feel like halfway decent until probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and then you kind of like repeat that cycle. So that was the cycle that I was in, and it really took for me to move out of New York and be back at my parents' home for like when the lockdowns happened, which was crazy actually. My dad picked me up in New York on St. Patrick's Day, which is usually like the most like crazy day in New York. Like the streets are just flooded with like drunkard people. And
Yeah.
it was so bizarre. He drove into the city and we left the city. I got like packed up some of my stuff, and I think we might have saw like one or two people on the streets of New York that day, and like maybe one car. But anyways, yeah. So it kind of like took me to get back at my house and kind of have a reset, the great reset of myself. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and so let me pull this all together. So not to go too far back, but a couple months before March when the lockdowns happened, I was doing some networking, and this guy recommended I get on Twitter, and it was more sort of like follow. I'd say like probably more like typical, CNBC guests, right? Like Bill
Hmm.
Ackman, like crying on CNBC, like those, like. But one thing led me to the next, and I was listening to Macro Voices a bunch, and there's a lot of good guests on that podcast. And I found Bitcoin Twitter. This is all in 2020, and I don't know. I just had a lot of time on my hands, and I actually used it wisely. So I started exercising a bunch. Like I was pretty fat at the time, and like I couldn't run for shit. So I just like got myself to start running, and I started doing some calisthenics, working that into my process. And instead of like playing video games after work or watching TV, I would just I would do some reading or some research or something, listen to a podcast or go for a walk. I think I just really needed that time to unplug from the hecticness of like a city living and being whatever I was at the time, 23. I needed that time away from it. And at the same time, like all this stuff was happening with COVID, and it was like, all right, just like Wall Street's doing so well, record year for Wall Street, shut down all the small businesses. And I just had a lot of time on my hands to think about kind of the way the world was. And after 6, 9 months of that, I kind of became a different person, I would say. A lot of things didn't sit right with me. So that was really, I definitely had like a bit of a transformation in 2020, personally, and I guess in every way, really.
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, it's makes me so bullish on Bitcoin, seeing that's like I've been going to Bitcoin meetups here in Boston, and it's almost like every single person you meet who's truly gone down the rabbit hole, they have some type of transformation similar to the one you just described, where so many of their habits get so much better, and they actually care deeply about things, and they want to make the world a better place. And it's a great reset, just not the kind that Klaus Schwab wants, where we're all in pods eating crickets and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah.
It's one
It's
where
the
we
opposite of that.
decenter yeah, where we decentralize the food supply and take back control of our life, and are intentional with our actions.
Yeah, I think the intentionality is so important. Something I try to do now is like I like to go into the next day with kind of an idea of what I'm going to do. Otherwise, I just feel like the day gets away from me pretty easily. I do also have the luxury of not having a job at the moment, so I have a lot of time in my hands to use as I choose to. Um, but I think that could be expanded just to life in general. Like intentionality is important. You need to figure out, or I needed to figure out, like what interests me, what drove me, and I think if and for some reason Bitcoin, like maybe the low time preference and just all the different subjects and ideas that come together once you start reading and hearing different people's voices in the space, it just like kind of creates this transformation, and it's remarkable. I mean, I agree with you. Like most people I've come across have had some sort of story like that.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what's it been like orange pilling people? I'll admit in 2020, like I said, 2017, I didn't think much of it. I didn't actually do any research. And in 2020, I started going down the rabbit hole. And of course, there was a massive bull market. And I think initially I was a little, too easily excited. And I told my family about it in 2017. But, in 2020, it's like, guys, this thing's going to 100K. You got to get something like yesterday. And now I'm at the point. It's like I will gladly talk to anyone about Bitcoin for hours, but I'm not so quick to be like, but it's much more like, hey, you should take the time to learn about it, and self custody and download a Moon wallet. I'll send you $1 right now and show you how great it is. We don't need a bank. What's kind of been your experiencing orange pilling people in your life, friends and family?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, like they need to have an open mind about it. If I found that if I want to talk to one of my friends about it, but they don't really seem to have an interest after I've brought it up, like a handful of times, and I just don't bother with it. It's like, all right, it's a waste of my time. It's a waste of your time, apparently. So we're not going to talk about it anymore. But I've had some friends, like some close friends, have been more receptive to it, and I I really wasn't that gung ho on it until like 2020, to be honest. Like I started accumulating more in like late 2018, 2019, but it wasn't until 2020 where I was definitely like more of like a Bitcoiner or a Bitcoin maximalist. And since then, I've definitely gotten my friends to buy some. And what I've done personally is just try to get them on a Swan account, um, and just have like some sort of DCA like savings plan set up for them, whatever they think is appropriate, whether that's like 25 bucks a week or if it's $100 a week, whatever works for this person. I think they just like need to buy a little bit, and then I'll send them resources. But like, yeah, I feel like sometimes like some people want to read stuff, other people don't have an interest in reading it. Like I bought one of my friends, thank God for Bitcoin, and I think he read like a couple chapters of it, thought it was interesting, and then like kind of moved on with his life. So it's tough, man. I mean, there's only so much you can do. Like people either will find an interest in it, or they won't. But what I found is like you just kind of have to. Your time is scarce, and my time is scarce. So if people don't want to understand it, then I don't have time to explain it to you, right? So it's like,
Yep.
uh,
It's
but even
it's
like there's some like barriers that still come up. Like my one friend is like so convinced that the government's going to ban Bitcoin or like something crazy is going to happen and like it's going to get wiped to zero. And I just don't talk about it to him anymore. I just tell him like once Bitcoin's like $1 million a coin, I'll buy him a nice steak dinner and he can apologize to me. Um,
I love
but
that,
even
man.
my dad, like, dude, I mean, he's a smart guy and he is pretty much a Bitcoiner, whether he would want to admit it or not. But we're finally getting like after a couple of years, he's finally about I think very close to buying some Bitcoin. I think the thing for him is just the custody of it. He's just read too many stories of people like losing their keys and not being able to recover their Bitcoin. So I'm gonna dig into Unchained a bit more. I've been thinking about doing multi-sig for myself as well, but I'm gonna just do a little more homework on Unchained and see if I can figure out a solution that would work well for him. Because I think he just needs to buy some Bitcoin already.
Yeah, 100%. And then they get a little in, and then they're more invested, and they're watching the price, and then they're like, "All right, maybe I'll learn about this thing." That's so funny that bookstore you mentioned because I remember after reading the Bitcoin Standard, I was like, holy shit. I bought it for my mom, my dad, one of my best friends. And I think the same thing. Like, at best, they've read a couple chapters. It's like everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. And obviously we're happy to be there as a resource, but you can only do so much to convince someone until they're really ready to actually take the leap and go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I agree. It's just like there's only so much, and it goes kind of go back to apathy. I think like people are very apathetic in general. It's almost like night and day, honestly, between like Bitcoiners like who seem to be like very open-minded and interested in new ideas versus like let's say like fiat drones, which
NPCs.
they're not bad people, right? But like they just kind of have like their routine or their habit and it works for them, so they stick with it and they don't really want to do the proof of work to understand it.
Yeah. I'm going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. It led me to kind of go down an energy rabbit hole, if you will. And I've been reading Alex Epstein's Fossil Future. And, growing up, I just remember it's like, I feel like Bitcoin has, things I just took for granted as fact due to apathy and I didn't think much about it. It kind of led me to realize that a lot of the things I've been taught are like some type of psychological operation being run on the masses. And just seeing how well Alex was able to lay out how dependent the world is on fossil fuels and how going away from them to things like wind and solar is absolutely crazy if you look at it from a first principles perspective. And it's not that at any point in the book he says like we don't need to make our climate better, we're fine, we don't have to. It's like we do, but the idea that wind and solar are going to fix those things is so flawed. And it really did kind of feel like I was like so many of the things that I had a deep belief in, like, anyone who said climate change isn't real, it's like you're a bad person. And now it's like, I mean, Jordan Peterson's talking, it's like, how many variables there are in these models, and to think that some person can predict every single thing about the climate and we can centrally plan it. I think the biggest thing, I put it in my article, it's like that chart where it was the hockey stick of CO2 usage going up, and then the amount of
Mm-hmm.
climate related deaths doing the exact opposite. And it's just wild how when you actually take the time to look at it, we need more first principle thinkers. And it just seems like they're now that the vid has passed, it's like, right, we're on to climate change. That's how we're going to control the masses. And it's very frustrating sometimes trying to explain this to friends and family, and they don't see it. Like, it's not a big deal, like, don't worry about it. It's like, it is a big deal. California is banning electric vehicles after 2035, and this, a week later they're saying, hey, please don't charge your car, it's too much strain on the grid. What do you think is going to happen when 100% of people have electric vehicles?
Yeah, it's a big mess. So I guess like it really is such a mess. I wrote a thread kind of about this. I haven't read that book, which I really would like to. But I don't know about you, but I have just such a bad habit of buying way more books than I actually have the time to read.
Dude, I'm like getting 5 books right now, and like I'm trying, like same thing. I'm gonna get to them at some point, but I got to be more intentional with my day. Put it down like, all right, I'm reading at least 10 pages of this book, and slowly but surely I'll get through it.
Yeah, so I have that one on my reading list, but it's not even in the house yet. So it's kind of like 2 stages behind actually being read. But I've heard good things. I've heard Alex on a couple of podcasts, and of course I get a lot of entertainment out of Saifedean talking about climate on Twitter. So, but yeah, I mean it is like for I don't even know the right term for climate scientists, if that's what we call them, to just kind of say like, yeah, we could control the climate with CO2. Like I think Saifedean talked about it being like the climate control knob. It's just nonsensical. Like truthfully, I don't know enough about carbon and its its impact in the environment and all that, but I know for sure it's overblown. Like and just the fact that the solution is like, oh, like, we need to print more money and we need to invest it into these energy sources, which we all have a big financial incentive in these companies. Like, it's the same thing with food as well, like the alternative protein companies and all of that. Like, yeah, there's a push for that because they're higher margins. Like, they can get intellectual property rights on this like food science because it's not actual food. Um,
Yep.
but going to the other thing that you talked about that I want to talk about too is like, it is a big deal because we're seeing this play out in real time where like Sri Lanka, for instance, had an ESG score of 98, and that was because they decided to ban chemical fertilizer use in 2021. And then, look what happens in 2022. They don't even have enough food. So then they're burning all of their foreign exchange reserves to import food when I think they're usually a net exporter of agriculture, if I'm correct. But they burned all of their money having to import food because their crop was so bad because there's a whole nother thing to get into, but like, they've used chemical fertilizers and completely destroyed the soil. So they need to continue to do so. So yeah, they had an ESG score of 98. But that meant they collapsed their entire country. So like there are big consequences to this. And unfortunately, it's all downstream from the fiat monetary system because capital would only flow to investments that people could get like a return on their investment that wasn't relying on like subsidies, right? So, the entire like renewable energy business that's like wind and solar, like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it is viable like 50 years from now. But if you need to completely subsidize the industry and then it still doesn't even provide, like, it actually destabilizes the energy grid, then that doesn't make any sense. And that's only possible because of fiat money, because they could just kind of direct it to these political agendas that they have.
Yeah, I mean that's why Alex does such a good job in the book, just laying out how it just all goes back to incentives, and because natural gas, coal, oil is essentially some of the most energy dense and abundant and cheap way to harness energy. That is what the free market chose as energy, kind of in the same way that it chose gold before we had something like Bitcoin. And it's so crazy to see the hypocrisy in people saying like, oh, we want a cleaner, better world and we have to reduce our carbon, while at the same time these same people take private jets into Davos and in that one flight are using more energy than someone in an underdeveloped country might use in their whole lifetime. And yeah, we need people to stop being so apathetic. And I think Bitcoiners are, and at some point, people are going to realize when they can't afford the next meal, or it's like, fuck around and find out. That's what Sri Lanka did. It had the best ESG score in the world, and the WEF is like, this is the poster child. This is what we need. And then now Sri Lanka's government has been overthrown because the people, rightfully so, protested and got pissed that their government just made these egregious decisions so they could virtue signal to the World Economic Forum, hey, look what we did. We got rid of these fertilizers that the entire world at this point, depends on.
Yeah. And you made such a good point too, that really, like, I can't honestly comprehend how people don't see the hypocrisy of this stuff. Like you have people like Larry Fink who, own like beautiful homes out in like the Rocky Mountains, like I think maybe in Aspen. He's flying private to Davos to, talk about the climate crisis, and just like, or it's like the Obamas like buying a house on Martha's Vineyard and talking about sea level change. It's just like, how do people not realize just like how much hypocrisy is out there from people who they're saying one thing, but then they're doing the complete opposite thing of they're saying. Like, this is not really a complicated matter. I guess if you're just kind of maybe it's just because you're glued to the TV and like you only have one source of truth for everything, and that's kind of how this becomes an issue. But I think anyone who could step away from like technology and maybe decentralize your source of information, so it's not like CNN or Fox News and that's it. Like, maybe seek out some people who are more independent and get different types of different people's opinions on all these different matters, and this would clearly not be an issue. Like people would just be like, yeah, I mean, he says there's a climate emergency, but he's flying around to Switzerland and he's, like they're flying to Jeffrey Epstein's island. Like, what's like, it's just so ridiculous.
100% watch what these people do, not what they say, and then you can really see, if they're being genuine or, and I mean, you can almost like, I think you're right. Most people just watch the news and get their source that way, and it's ironic because Twitter is horrible about the censorship, but I feel like Bitcoin Twitter does a pretty good job of helping you decentralize where you get your information from. And at least from my experience, like not just Bitcoiners, but anyone who really thinks critically and is seeking truth, you can tell when they're talking on a podcast or whatever medium you're listening to them that they're being genuine and that they're trying to actually think through things and not push some agenda or manipulate the truth to enrich themselves. And I mean, that's kind of a skill in itself, but it seems like the more podcasts you listen to, the more you decentralize where you get your information from, it just becomes so abundantly clear. And seems like a lot of Bitcoiners just over time get a lot better at finding the signal in an incredibly noisy world nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, Twitter's definitely been a great resource for me. And I'm sure it has been for you too. I think one of the bigger somewhere where Bitcoiners could do better is trying to get some of this signal outside of Twitter as well.
Yeah.
Now I don't know. I haven't even like I haven't even been publishing on LinkedIn because I'm still unsure, what I want to start sharing because I'm kind of pseudonymous, but like I think people could figure out who I was if they wanted to. But I haven't been like publishing on LinkedIn just because, some of the things that I will write about are controversial, even though they shouldn't be. Like nothing should really nothing should really be controversial because we should be able to speak our minds freely. As long as we're like not threatening anyone's life or like, not really like assaulting someone verbally. And I think there's some line that's crossed, right? I think you should be able to speak your mind without any repercussions. And that's really like that's important. I think you need to have an honest society, but it kind of sucks because I'm 26 and I kind of have to rely on these companies that are all out there like virtue signaling about bullshit. I'm kind of relying on them for an income, at least in the time being. Like ideally, I'd like to figure out a way to make my income stream completely independent of anyone else. But I'm not there yet, and I probably won't be for a bit. So it's tough, man. Like I think there's so much need for this same kind of signal on Twitter, but I mean, there's a reason why so many people are anonymous on Twitter. I mean, it's partly because of Bitcoin and like that's part of the culture, but like it's also because people like they need to make money somehow, and everything's just become so like politicized. It's like literally a communist state where you can't really like speak out against like the policymakers because or like the corporations because they're all like they're all under the same thought leadership at this point, and if they don't like what you're saying then you're probably going to be out of a job.
Dude, that's such an excellent point. On Twitter, I don't know why, but I keep seeing the ad where it's like, this technology might be brought back to eliminate fossil fuels or whatever. And it's the MSNBC ad, and it's like a giant cargo ship, and it has like a massive sail that's guiding it. And I mean, it's like like there's no way in hell we're going to turn cargo ships into sailboats again. So I quote tweeted on Twitter, and I'm like, to do my part to fight climate change, I'm going to start riding a horse and sell my car, like showing like how ridiculous it is to have technology regress like that. But to your point, I would never post that on LinkedIn, because of fear there would be repercussions in my fiat job, if you will. Like it's in our Constitution, like the First Amendment, freedom of speech. You should be able to say those things. You should be able to mock bad ideas, and it should not be controversial to say, I don't want to eat crickets. I want to shake a rancher's hand and get my food that way. And no, I don't like seed oils in my food or Beyond Meat or any of this. And the fact that any of that is like somewhat controversial or against the narrative, and you could lose your job for that. I think it's a big reason why so many of these hypocritical stances are so pervasive. And I don't know how it's been in your life, but like sometimes my family jokes like, "Oh, we're little conspiracy theorists," and it's like, guys, like and I understand they're not on Bitcoin Twitter. They a lot of them probably watching the mainstream media, but it's like this is not a conspiracy. Like it is in front of our face at this point. Just go look at Klaus Schwab's book, The Great Reset. He talks about all of these things. Like this, these are how these people feel about us.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I'm definitely treated the same way for sure by my friends. Like, I'm definitely the most out there of my group of friends, but I guess I'm paying a little bit more attention than other people. And nothing that like even going back to the LinkedIn thing, like nothing I'm saying is even that like it's nothing inappropriate, I would say. Like if you could speak your mind freely, like I should be able to say what I'm saying on Twitter on LinkedIn. But like you said, then it's kind of an echo chamber on LinkedIn where people or really like an office space, right? Like anything corporate, it's all like people are just kind of regurgitating the same ideas. Like the last firm I worked at was like all about ESG, and like obviously I think ESG is bullshit. Um, but like I can't say that, So, um, but yeah, and then like for sure, I mean, people I guess don't want to spend the time to under. I don't know. I'm reading like I like to read after work or listen to a podcast, and one of my friends is like watching The Bachelor with his fiance. I'm like, all right, well, I have better uses for my time. I'm not going to watch that show, but if you want to do that, then that's okay. But this is kind of why like you and we have more information than other people is because a lot of people just kind of they don't want to put in the time to like kind of look into other stuff.
Yeah, no, and it just like I swear, doing a podcast like this and going to Bitcoin meetups in real life, it's like no wonder Bitcoiners are so bullish because it's like so clear as day sometimes. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with watching The Bachelor, but like if you're more concerned with whatever reality TV show is happening than the fact that just as an example, our strategic oil reserve is about to run out, inflation's at record highs, and you're not thinking about ways to protect yourself, stock up on goods, just try and ride out, what the future might hold. Uh, it's not surprising that a lot of people are just so apathetic and would rather just, it's like that cognitive dissonance. They'd rather just say, oh, no, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist. Bill Gates doesn't want to enslave humanity. And Bill Gates isn't buying up all the farmland. And ESG has nothing to do with the CCP. And don't worry about any of that. It's like,
Yeah.
like Marty Vince says, it's like clown show. It's a circus world. And people are watching the circus rather than seeing, the malicious stuff or the people who are trying to burn down the circus from the outside.
Yeah, it's so true, man. People are more concerned about reality TV than their own lives. Unfortunately, it's the world we live in right now. It's an
Yeah,
unfortunate truth, I would say.
yeah. But hey, Bitcoiners are going to save us. I got faith in the fact that it hopefully will help the. I mean, it's just it's like it's so ironic that I feel like a big part of the ESG narrative is demonizing profit, right? Because there's nothing wrong with making profit. Profit is what it's the incentive to work. It's like the reason socialism and communism typically doesn't work because never works throughout history is because when you take away the ability for people to profit, it just completely corrupts the incentive. And the whole reason the ESG thing is being pushed is because the people who are pushing it want to profit from it, want to subsidize whether it be wind or solar or whatever. And until we, like you said, have the R&D to have the battery technology or sustainable ways, it's like if those people really cared, they'd be pushing nuclear solutions in all sorts of ways to actually provide abundant energy to the grid rather than being hypocritical. And it just makes me so happy that Bitcoin, what keeps the network growing and will have it continue to use more and more electricity and secure everyone's life worth is profit. I mean, it's just such a beautiful incentive structure. And it takes a lot to kind of come to that conclusion. But to anyone listening, like I encourage you to go down that rabbit hole because it is just such a beautiful thing and it can help defeat a lot of the hypocrisy we're seeing in our world today.
Yeah, I think yeah, for listeners, I would say The Price of Tomorrow is a fantastic book. Connor, I don't know if
That's
you've
on
read
my
that,
list.
but
I've read a lot of Jeff Booth. I've listened to a lot of Jeff Booth, but I have not read that book. But that is on my list. I've been meaning to read that forever because I think Jeff is brilliant.
yeah. So I think people should read that book because Jeff just makes it very clear that the system as it exists today is just unsustainable. And I think that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to as well is it's really just like history has proven at this point where governments will continue to debase a currency until like society collapses. So I'm not like I'm not here to say that's going to happen tomorrow or maybe not even this decade, but I think things will continue to get I think wealth inequality will continue to grow as a consequence of printing money um, and giving it to the people most connected to the money printer at the expense of everyone else. And then I think there will be a point where people will have enough with that. Like you saw what happened in Sri Lanka, and people will get pushed to their limits at some point, unless things change. And I think that's what's so important about Bitcoin is it's more the way Jeff talks about it is like the technology is kind of congruent with, um, or yeah, Bitcoin's technology is congruent with kind of like I would say human nature. Like things should become more abundant and not more scarce over time, right? So like if we're continuously manipulating the money and things are going up in price, that's signaling to us that things are becoming more scarce. But if you look at anything like, our cell phones or our computers or anything that technologies touch, which is becoming almost everything nowadays, like you can produce things for a much cheaper cost. So we should almost be in a completely different monetary system than we're in today, where prices should be going down instead of going up. Um, and I think it's such an important book to read, and it's why I'm so bullish on Bitcoin is because I think like this system that we're in right now is just going to like eat itself alive. Again, I don't think it'll be as soon as some people will say on Bitcoin Twitter, but I think it will happen. And thankfully, there is an alternative available to us, which could make a transition more smooth. Um, but who knows how it's all going to play out too? Like they're going to, like you said earlier in this podcast, they're going to push the climate narrative big time. I don't know if you've ever read any of like Laserhodl's work, which is pretty interesting. I don't think I'm fully subscribed to his thesis, but it's very interesting. I mean, like he talks. Have you read it? I don't know. I don't want to.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so
I'm curious. So what did you talk about?
he talks about like monetary reset and kind of viewing everything that happens today as a function of kind of resetting the monetary board. So before there used to be wars like kinetic wars where after that there'd be like kind of a new world order, like for instance the Bretton Woods system
Yeah.
came after World War II, and there was the world reserve currency. Um, and his argument is that like we're kind of in this new reset period, but instead of using war as like a hot war typical of the past to reset the monetary board, since there's like nuclear, there's
It'd be
there are some
mass
nuclear risks
destruction.
out there, so
Yeah.
that is not as viable. So his thesis is kind of like COVID, climate, cyber pandemic, whatever comes, like this is all kind of part of the monetary reset where I think we're kind of getting to the point where fiats as they exist today are unsustainable. So they're trying to create these crises to get people into like the CBDC technology, and then
Mm.
who knows? That's just like not a good future to think about. Like, and that's not even speculating either. You can just kind of look at China and see what happens to people on a
Yeah.
social credit system.
Seriously. And I remember seeing some story, I think it was on 60 Minutes, of like a dude who was investigating corruption in the CCP. And all of a sudden, he can't buy a train ticket. He can't buy food at the grocery store. They just completely shut off his bank account with the click of a button. And you're right. I mean, that is what they're going to try and usher in. And it's so funny because, like, my mom's a brilliant woman, but she's constantly like, why don't you go work at the Fed? I'm like, Mom, I'm like trying to convince people we never need central banks again. She's like, no, but like, like you want to keep your enemies close. I'm like, Mom, like, you don't understand. I will never, ever work at a central bank. That's the last thing I want to do. I hate central banks. She's like, yeah, but honey, you gotta keep your enemies close. Well, I can't do it. I love you, but like you don't realize how evil these central bank digital currencies could be. And it's crazy too. I don't know if you saw that speech of I think his name's Neil Kashkari or something like that.
Yeah.
The dude with the meme who's like, we have unlimited money at the Federal
Oh
Reserve.
yeah.
And he was talking, he's like, I just don't understand the reason we would need a central bank digital currency. I can Venmo anyone in this room $5. What reason do we have? And it's like, I guess it's good to see a Fed president say that. But I mean, it's true too. It's like, I think Laserhodl brings up a really good point. And there's a Bitcoin rapper named Satillionaire, and he's got a song. I forget what the song is, but it's on his album, and it's the one featuring Alex Svetsky. And in the beginning of the song, it comes out. It's like the difference between those who live in the modern day gulags and those who are free is going to be Bitcoin. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because if they have CBDCs, people talk about smart contracts and all this other crap you can do in Web3, but no one talks about, like, what if we gave the Fed or a central bank the ability to create smart contracts? They could write it up so you can only spend on food, and you can't buy meat because that's too much carbon. You can only buy freaking blue colored pancake syrup. And I mean, they could program it so you can
Yeah.
only spend on, and then, like you said, if you tweet something out on the social media they don't like, or you make a thread that questions the elite, it's like, oh, yep, we're gonna shout out his bank account. He's not gonna be allowed to eat for a week, and until he deletes that tweet and admits his wrongdoing. I mean, that, like, people, it's what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? About 6 months. I mean, that is just proven to be more and more true over the last 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame, but yeah, a lot of the things that people predicted, like in the early days of the pandemic, ended up happening. And yeah, I mean, CBDCs are not something to even like. I don't even like want to joke around about it, because it's just like, oh shit, like that would really suck. And that's just like not a system that would benefit really anyone. And I think if people were paying enough attention to what is happening in China with like their COVID tracing technology, and I don't know if you heard about the story about like people's deposits getting
Yeah,
seized.
read a
Yeah,
little.
and then like
Yeah, crazy.
they were using COVID. They were like turning their status red, so they couldn't get on the bus to go to the bank to protest, and like things get really bad really quickly. And that's really the CBDC is like that would really put the nail in the coffin in terms of like a kind of like a return to a like us being serfs essentially, like a new feudalistic society where we are completely controlled by those who control the money. At least like right now, there's a tiny bit of freedom, because Bitcoin exists and you still use cash, and there's still all these payment rails like with the commercial banking system and everything. So it's not as centralized. I mean, obviously that you and I both know well that there's a ton of issues with it, but I think that next step to like kind of even disintermediate the commercial banking system and like just have people interact directly with the central bank, and that's just like kind of a nightmare scenario.
100%. I think a lot of people in the United States say, "Oh, that could never happen here," because we are very fortunate to have a constitution that gives us a lot of rights and liberties. But I saw an article that just came out about how Visa, Mastercard, and American Express are going to start labeling any transactions at a gun store. So if you buy ammo or guns, which is literally in our constitution, Second Amendment will not be infringed. Now Visa, Amex, Mastercard. I mean, if you don't use cash to purchase a gun, if you want one, you're going to be put on some registry. Now according to Visa, Amex, and Mastercard, I'm pretty sure all American companies, and it's like to all the people who say like, "Oh, that could never happen here," it's like it's happening in real time before our eyes. To a certain, luckily, we don't all have a CBDC tied to the Fed, but we still have these payment rails. And I went, I went up to the road to my local market, and they're not accepting cash anymore. It says no longer, and it's like my heart's, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, this is not good. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
So, listeners out there, you got to buy some beef. And now that we're talking about it,
yeah,
you also do have to buy a gun and cash soon. Um,
100% stack
yeah.
sats, stack cash, stack beef, stack guns, and
Yeah.
you should be all right.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the beef narrative with climate, like livestock just being demonized, like that's going to be a big issue. And I think that's just another reason why you should just localize as much of your key inputs as possible. Because I don't know what the future will look like at a grocery store, but if they're already trying to just like really get this idea into people's heads, like I don't know if you've heard about New York City and like meatless Mondays and like vegan Fridays and all this stuff, like this
Crazy.
next generation of children that are growing up in these cities are going to be so radicalized about this COVID, or sorry, about this climate agenda. Um, and it's pretty crazy, man. Like I at my last job, I actually remember vividly. I had this call with like some investor who somehow, yeah, he somehow started talking to me about like being a vegan, and he was just saying like, oh, like we don't have to worry about the cars emissions. Like we should have all of our attention focused on the cows. And I'm just thinking to myself like this, people are really brainwashed, man. Like how could you possibly think that an animal that's just been like eating grass, right, for like tens of
Seriously.
thousands of years
Fertilizing the
is like,
ground.
yeah, like how could you possibly think that that's causing a climate crisis? So it's going to be tough, man. Like there's a lot of propaganda out there, and they're really definitely going to be pushing like whatever they call alternative protein, like bug protein, all that shit, because it's high margin for them. Like you can make a lot of money off that. You can't make a ton of money off of beef. So again, I think it's just about the money, and we need to fix the money, or else like these issues will just continue, and there's really no other solution, in my opinion.
Yeah, and of course they're going for the children because it's like I'm sure. I'm not saying that dude was a bad dude, but like it seems like what he was saying is like he thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's being a good person and helping the world. And if you can brainwash kids to think that, I mean, I know like I brought up the energy thing earlier because for forever I thought like anyone who denies climate change is a bad person, and it was like having to like literally deal with that cognitive dissonance of like, holy shit, like I am so wrong on this, and I didn't think about it from a first principles perspective, and I thought I was being a good person. So I think that is probably one of the biggest barriers Bitcoin has. The apathy of like, yeah, I just don't feel like putting in the work. But then as you do, it like makes a lot of people question their most deeply held beliefs, and they look at their past action like, I thought I was being a good person. Little did I know I was doing a horrible thing for the world. I wasn't helping. I was hindering the world, and um, to deal with that, it's hard for people, and it's
Yeah,
I really
it's
hadn't thought about that.
it's tough, man. I mean, there's like it's like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like at some point, people don't necessarily want to admit that they were wrong about something, or they just kind of want to turn a blind eye to it, or they'll never admit they're wrong because maybe that belief is so formative to who they are as a person, or there's something else. But yeah, I think the climate narrative is going to be a big challenge. Like the White House is already talking about banning proof of work mining because of the climate, right? So I wrote a thread about that today, but like it's just going to be one thing after another, man. And hopefully, you know, unfortunately, I think it's going to take actual human suffering to wake people up, which that's really just such a sad thing to think about. But like the energy crisis in Europe, I don't know. From what I've been reading for the past couple of months, it sounds pretty dire. Now I'm not
Yeah.
going to like sit here and say that I am like an energy expert because I'm not, but just understanding like the dynamic between Russia and Europe, and just Europe, like their terrible energy policy for like 2 decades, and completely phasing out like reliable energy, not looking at nuclear. Like the prices are insane there, man. And it's not hard to imagine like an energy crisis turns into a food crisis. And I don't know, like it could get pretty bad in the next like 6 to 12 months. Fortunately, like I think we're very blessed being here in the U.S. Like we're in a very privileged position, kind of comparing ourselves to the rest of the world. But I think it's going to be really rough for probably billions of people. Not saying billions of people are going to die, but billions of people will probably be impacted by this cascading effect of the energy crisis and food crisis. And I mean, I guess the only positive, you could take away from that is like people will have to come to a conclusion that this could have been avoidable. But it's also very likely that that wouldn't happen. But there seems to be a lot of unrest already in the rest of the world, and people are becoming very fed up with their governments just really making terrible decisions and putting them in precarious situations.
Yeah, what's the saying? Pain is the best teacher. I mean, you're so spot on.
Yeah,
We don't want to see suffering, but it's like it's going to get to a point where the pain is just too much, and we're going to have. I mean, that's what happened in Sri Lanka, right? The pain of not having food and fuel to put in your car. It was too much, and the people rejected it. And hopefully, the West and Europe doesn't fall into that. But to your point about the White House thing, and you're right, it does seem like they're really trying to think about ways to ban proof of work. But it's going to be so interesting to see how something like that plays out because you got places like Texas and Wyoming, which it seems like Bitcoin mining is becoming so rapidly integrated with that, and I just don't see a future where Texas and Wyoming are just going to let that fly. If the U.S. tried to pull some BS, and then maybe who knows? I know Max Kaiser always talks about like it killing the nation state, and I think the U.S. Constitution is a beautiful thing, but we've gotten so far away from the ethos of that Constitution in our federal government, and it's very interesting to see how it plays out. But good times create weak men, and then that leads to a bunch of pain, and then those hard times end up creating stronger men because pain serves as a great teacher for them.
yeah, no doubt. There's a lot of weak men out there for sure. I was definitely one myself. I'm not going to say I'm the strongest man out there, but I'm
And
I feel like
clearly
I'm
come a
on my
long
way.
way.
I'm
Yeah.
on my way for sure, and I feel good about the progress I've made. And I think that people just need to live intentionally and figure out like what gets them up in the morning. And they also like people have to spend time to understand what's wrong with the system. Like I think generally speaking, most people our age, they know that something is wrong. Like you can just kind of feel it, and there's so many narratives out there that will kind of they'll try to guide you in a certain way and say like, oh yeah, well, like it's because we need a socialist system, right? Or like, oh, um it's because Joe Biden's president. Like no, we are just on like this 51-year experiment of the monetary system, and
Yeah.
it's just not going well. Like I mean, just if people go to the website, like WTF happened in 1971, like I'm sure like some of it's like not, I think it's like probably some things that are like just correlations, not causations, but I would say a lot of it is linked to just money for nothing. And that just has distorted so many areas of our society today.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I actually met the guy who created that website at a Bitcoin meetup in Boston. Really
That's
smart
cool.
dude. Yeah,
That's awesome. How's the community up there?
it's good. I recently just started going. I actually I went to the Boston BitDevs meetup, and man, I was so excited. They had this amazing food, and I was ready. And I ate a steak skewer, and I got like a piece of steak stuck in my throat, and it wasn't like I was choking on it, but like it was like lodged to the side, and I couldn't get it out, and I kept having to like spit. And so, anyways, long story short, like it just after like an hour, I like anytime I tried to drink or eat anything, I had to go to the bathroom, like spit it up, and so I had to like run out, and I couldn't eat any of the food. I couldn't eat the beer. I was getting so excited to like watch this, watch the BitDevs people do their thing and learn, and I had to end up leaving and. I was able to dislodge it with some seltzer water. Shout out Google for showing me how to man, it was the most like brought a whole new meaning of find what you love and let it kill you. Like I got steak, this beautiful dinner, I'm like ready, for this awesome Bitcoin meetup, and I was so sad to have to like run out in the middle of it. It's like, but it's a really close, tight knit group. Everyone I've met has just made me so bullish on Bitcoin, and I can't say enough good things about all the people I've met, and it's nice too when newbies show up and I'll have them download Moon Wallet and I'll send them $1 just to show them, and like that reaction, like I didn't have to sign up with the bank, no KYC, no, and you can just, and I think in the States we're privileged because of our financial rails, but even then, a lot of people are like, holy shit, like there was no sign up, like just immediately like that, like it just works. I mean, it's rewarding for both of us. The person who gets the free dollar and me to see the reaction on their face when they realize we don't need a central party anymore to transact with each other.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and something that I need to do that more often. I think that's a great way of just showing people, the functionality of the system, right? Like going back to the very beginning of this conversation, like it's not really an investment. Like maybe it could be an investment for some people, and that's okay if that's all Bitcoin will be for you. But there's a lot more going on with Bitcoin than, kind of meets the eye. If you read like a CNBC headline, it's like, oh, like is Bitcoin an inflation hedge? Well, CPI is 8% and it's down 10%. So it's not like there's a lot more other things to be thinking about. And I think that's a great strategy that you have. I think I heard I think maybe Odell was talking about that too or something. And I need to do that a bit more because I think it's such a great way to show how simple it is and easy it is to use.
Yeah, 100%. Then they get that dollar, and the next thing they know, it turns to $10, and then they go down the rabbit hole, and we get more Bitcoiners. We create that circular economy, and we get this ship steered in the right direction. So this 51-year experiment with fiat currency doesn't absolutely, destroy everything.
Yeah, which it will, man. I think it actually will.
And we're fucking around and
We
finding
gotta,
out real
yeah,
fast.
yeah, we gotta. I think something I need to think about more is just figuring out how to get the signal outside of Twitter without what without compromising myself professionally for the meantime, because I need to make money. So I got to figure that out.
Hey, no, I'm in the same boat, man, but we're going to figure it out. Keep doing this. Jackson, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate you making some time to come chat with me. I'm even more bullish on Bitcoin than I already was, which was a lot before this podcast. Where can people find you on the internet right now?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Appreciate it. Actually, my first podcast ever, so honored to come
Let's
on the
go.
show. So thank you.
Honored to have you.
Yeah, just come on Twitter at Macrojack21. I'm just writing there, so yeah, come check it out. Send me a DM. Happy to connect with any Bitcoiners out there.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, and I'll definitely have you back on here so we can keep spreading at least I think we're spreading signal to the people,
Hopefully,
right?
at least to one person. I hope there's one person out there.
Yeah. Hey, man, if we orange pilled one person, then we did what we wanted.